Today's date, July 4th, 2020. We're in the midst of the COVID pandemic. We're also in the midst of a social revolution after the killing of George Floyd. And in the midst of that, Lawson and his son Tyler, Lawson Christian, decided to come down visit Ma, Esther, the family here in Maryland. And I was just remarking this morning that when I was a high schooler, maybe about 11, 12 years old, Lawson brought a book home by Dr. W.B. Du Bois, or Dubois, The Soul of Black Folk. And I realized later on in life how important that book was. And that in our home in the early 1970s on Dominica, we had a book on black pride and black history and so on. And here we are facing this uprising over the death of George Floyd. And I thought it'd be important to ask Lawson how he's doing, welcome him again to Maryland, and ask him about the souls of black folk. Lawson?
Before I go further, let me just say a little thing of black pride. If what pride means this day and age, to be not confused with the gay stuff. Black pride is talking about self-love, self-image,
Yes.
etc., etc.
That's right.
But how are you doing?
Oh, well, Lawson, we're thankful to God. I just spoke with our friend here, Terry, in Israel, and she's very concerned. She was born in New York, actually. But, like many New York Jews, they go back and forth between New York and Israel. So we're talking about science and finding a solution to COVID-19. Yes.
Yeah. So what was this question again?
Well, why did you buy, or, how did you get to have a copy of Souls of Black Folk in 1971, 72?
Well, I didn't target that book specifically. That period in the early 70s, period of Black Power, self-consciousness, it was simply one of the books on my to-get list. And other books I got at that time included Souls of Black, Soul on Ice by Eldridge Cleaver, Autobiography of Malcolm X by Malcolm X himself, and not to forget Wretched of the Earth by Franz Fanon.
Amazing, Lawson. You had Wretched of the Earth.
So the book by W.B. Du Bois was just one of them.
Amazing.
I didn't have a particular reason just for that book. It was just one of them.
Yes. Where did you buy these books? At CB's?
CB's, yes.
Yes. Amazing. Souls of Black Folk. The Wretched of the Earth, which is a classic by Franz Fanon, the psychiatrist, doctor from Martinique.
Mm. I may have borrowed one or two from the public library as well.
Yes. Did you also go to the MND library on Canal Lane?
No, it wasn't. In my time, it wasn't. It wasn't there yet.
Yes. What was the in the dom? So how was ideas in those days of Black Power coming to you? Black pride, self-love. Were you let's go back a little bit. 1968, the assassination of Dr. King. You would have been at grammar school by that time.
Yeah.
What do you remember about that?
Nothing much, actually. We, the young up and coming, were still, in a sense, very much in the traditional study of Western history and stuff like that. We weren't really self-aware as such, but with the Black Power movement of the early 70s, Stokely Carmichael, Eldridge Cleaver, Wade Newton, these were names that started to resonate with us. And obviously their publications then.
Where were you? So how were you getting your news? Because in those days we didn't have a television station, we had radio. Mm-hmm. So where would you be getting your news from in those days?
Well, depends on what news you're talking about.
Let's talk about radio, and then let's talk about magazines, newspapers, books.
Okay. Well, don't forget also that late 60s, early 70s, we started hearing about the Black Power leaders, and it wasn't through the traditional radio. It was just through back and forth goings and comings, Dominicans to the United States and back, Dominicans to Canada and back. And there was a lot of that inter-travel. And I think we derived a lot of information through the informal means, via word of mouth, much more than through the established media.
So, would people have known about Rosie Douglas, the Dominican?
Absolutely. Actually, I mean, he visited, you know, after he was set free from jail.
Yes, yes. What about magazines? What were the magazines you read in those days in the grammar school, 60, 69?
Well, in the late 60s, early 70s, when young radicals started to come about based on the influence of Dominicans in the United States and Dominicans in Canada, like I said, who were black power radicals, little magazines started to come about, like Travail and was one of them. Something New Mem, you know. And they were always focused on black consciousness, black power, you know, ruling for ourselves, self-empowerment, self-awareness.
I should have maybe asked you that question earlier, Lawson. You were born in 1954, and so by 68, and you were born to parents who may not have been university educated. Alberta Christian had been a student teacher. Wendell Christian had been in the British Army. What impact being in a home of literate parents who were focused on education, what impact did that have on your ideas and the formation of your ideas?
Well, definitely didn't contribute too much to the self-awareness part. It just contributed mainly to literacy, learning to read and write and taking pride in doing good at school. But when it came to the whole idea of self-awareness, black power, pride in color, that we got from radicals who had been in the United States and in England.
Give me some names.
First and foremost, of course, Rosie Douglas, then there was Bernard Wiltshire, there was Hilroy Thomas, and one or two others.
Para Revere.
Yeah, Para Revere.
I was told that Julian Johnson.
I read one or two books about or by Rodney
Walter
in Guyana.
Walter Rodney.
Walter Rodney in Guyana. And I think there were one or two Jamaican students as well, professors who were very radicalized. And that reminds me too, there was the Trinidad Revolution in 1970. Yes. They were the beginnings of what later led to the Grenada Revolution.
That's right.
In the early 70s.
A lot of times people forget the link between the Grenada Revolution and the earlier revolution in Trinidad, and there's a direct link, eh?
Exactly.
Because they were the same black power people, was it not?
We started reading at that time also about the freedom movements in Africa, yes. In South Africa, in Angola, in Mozambique, Frelimo, SWAPO, what was the name of the movement in South Africa?
ANC.
ANC. You know.
Was that because the Black Power movement would show films sometimes at the St. George's Hall and Parish Hall? They would have panel discussions and African Liberation Day marches?
Yes, partly that, and partly through magazines. And at that time, we started hearing, bits and pieces from National Public Radio and BBC and stuff like that. They would be carrying news of the goings on in those countries that I mentioned. Whereas if we had just gone up here and listened just to NBC and CNN and stuff like that, we would not have heard much about the, those radical movements.
So Lawson, that's interesting. But you also had magazines from the United States like Newsweek, Time, Reader's Digest. What, if anything, Ebony Magazine, Jet, what, if anything, did these magazines bring out in way of black consciousness or what was going on in the United States?
To be honest, not so much. I mean, they did carry news of incidents here and events here, but they didn't give you any in-depth analysis of black power as the books I mentioned did. Again, just to repeat the books. Red Shadow of the Earth, Soul on Ice, Autobiography of Malcolm X, amongst others.
What about Ebony and Jet magazine? Do you remember reading those?
Yeah.
What did those mean to you?
They're more like social media, though. I mean, they would talk about some black celebrities, Muhammad Ali, the tennis player Alpha Ash amongst others, but like very very superficial, very social leaning, and not so much
Jackson 5?
Jackson 5, yeah, not so much in-depth Black Power analysis. No.
You remember they would have a lot of pictures of big homes, like Black Stars would own. I remember seeing some palatial residencies of some, as you say, black celebrities.
Yeah.
So there's more on the social side. Well, let's talk now about now in the United States. How do you see things, considering that we have a social revolution in way of Black Lives Matter after the killing on May 25th, which was, by the way, African Liberation Day of George Floyd. And then, of course, in the midst of that, we're in the midst of the pandemic, COVID-19, so you have economic dislocation, people are not working, a lot of unemployment. How do you see the country if you can say these three perils: economic implosion, pandemic, COVID-19, and of course the social uprising in retaliation for the oppression of black folk by police and the economic system and mass incarceration, all those things?
Well, before we get to that, you ask about how do I see the country now. I'd like to compare it to the conversation we started talking about the radical things that started developing in the late 60s, 70s, where he talked about self-pride, self-awareness, black is beautiful. And then surprisingly and disappointedly, in the late 70s, early 80s, up till very recently, things started to go in reverse, I could say. Instead of the pride in black in one's hair, then the abundance of wigs.
Yes.
Wigs that carried a message like, this straight hair.
That's right.
Seems to be okay again at the risk of nappy hair.
Yes.
But I think that the Black Lives Matter came in at a good point, and it started reminding us of getting back to our roots and not forgetting the whole idea of the fight, the struggle is not over. So with the Black Lives Matter movement and all the demonstrations and protests that have come about since the killing of George Floyd, since the killing of Arbery, since the killing of Breonna Jackson, Breonna and a few others, it's not just one killing. I think the George Floyd thing kind of brought things to a head because it was like a modern day lynching.
Everybody could see.
But just to continue the point though, it brought everything to a head, and it was a matter of going forward. It's not going to be business as usual. We have a lot of business to take care of. And as you said, the lockdown and other social disparities have meant that we have a lot of issues to address in the black community, in the community of people of color.
What role? I read a very interesting article about the role of Trump. This person made the argument that Trump actually may have been a catalyst for good in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell me why you said that quickly. Tell me what you mean.
Yeah, absolutely. Because don't forget, we just came up from a 2-term president, Barack Obama, a man of color who, we put a lot of hope in him and stuff like that, but we realized he was constrained, he was restricted in a lot of ways because the white establishment had their leash on him in a sense. If he tried to get too radical, they would pull back that leash, close the banks, and say, we put you there, you're only gonna go so far. And himself, I guess, realized, coming from the establishment as he did, that if he went too radical, there would be big pushback. So there were all these restrictions, even whilst we had somebody of our own supposedly in power. But with the kind of coming of Donald Trump and his Make America Great Again slogan, we realized very quickly it meant, let's make America white again. Let's restore those the
Confederacy.
Not just the Confederacy, but let's restore the kind of privileges whites had in the 40s and 50s, where they could segregate various areas, have their own schools, have their own judges, have their own university setups, have their own leadership roles. And we have in progress, we as people of color have in progress, and at the same time facing a whole lot of disparity, realize that if we were to go along with that, we'd be going backwards in a very great way. And so in a sense, having this very controversial and reactionary president freed us up to be very motivated to push back, as it were, on his movement to bring things back.
That's a very interesting point. The point the guy was making was that because he has no filters, unlike some people who are covert, they don't show or say their true feelings, he exposed the latent racism that was in the society for all to see. What are your views?
But don't forget, he was always known, even in his past as a real estate executive from way back in the 80s or 90s, to be someone who was very reactionary against the progress of blacks. He was the one who came out and said about the Central Park Five, hang them. Yes. They were all discovered to be innocent later on. Yes. He was the one who, in renting out luxurious apartments, instituted a clause that blacks should not be allowed in there. Yes. He was the one who aimed the accusation at Trump that he should not have been president because he wasn't born in the United States.
You mean at Obama?
Obama, when it was clear and obvious to everyone that Obama was born in the United States. So he was known to be very reactionary, racist, and prejudiced, even well before he became president. Yeah. And let's not forget, among his rantings, when he ran for the presidential election, was his declaration that Mexicans are rapists and criminals and lowlifes, and by extension, minorities.
Yes. Very good point, Lawson. In your view, I mean, you have young children, relatively speaking. What do you see the society offering them? Where do you see things heading? Are we heading for a new civil war? Are we heading for a social revolution? Do you think they can put the genie of freedom back in the bottle now that people have tasted the fruit of liberty?
What I will say is that there's a lot of disruption down the road to be expected, because if Trump and his cronies think they're going to reverse things, it's not going to happen without a fight. And one thing that can be said about our young people today, or young aware people, whether it's students, the ranks of the unemployed, but young activists, is that they're not going to go down without a fight. So let the rednecks come, let the Ku Klux Klan come, let the white prejudicial people and neo-Nazis come, but we won't bow down, we won't take things lying down. There will be struggle.
Yes. Well, Lawson, I am confident that there will be struggle, and I'm confident that we shall win, because they are folks who believe in the Confederacy and slavery and racism and prejudice are losers. The Nazis, they killed a lot of Jews and started a war, but they lost that war. And I think, they can cause a lot of devastation, especially if they have help from, high officials in government and private sector. But I see so many Americans, black and white and others, uniting. That gives me hope. The composition, the racial composition of the demonstrations give you hope.
True.
Yes. And coming from New York, where you've been for most of your life now, how do you see I know you've not been out and about since COVID-19, but what is your sense of things in places like New York? What you've been able to discern?
Well, as you just said, because of the lockdown, I haven't been able to observe much things on the streets because I haven't been on the streets much. But maybe I'll give you a better answer 3 months from now.
Okay. Anything you'd like to say on this 4th July as you're here in Maryland?
Well, this 4th of July is definitely a 4th of July with a difference. Number one, there won't be all the festivities because of social distancing. But number two, we are at the point where we are reminded that, the Declaration of Independence on the 4th of July, as glorious as it was made to be, applied only to the privileged, applied only to white landowners. Not to the blacks, who were considered just 60% men and who for the most part enslaved. Not to the indigenous, against whom a battle of genocide was being fought. And certainly not to those who would come later, immigrants, Hispanic immigrants who, to a large extent, or a big war has been fought to keep them out. So now we are realizing that the 4th of July is not what it has always been made out to be. It's a reminder of injustices of the past, hypocrisy of the past, and oppression of the past, not the great freedom that it was proclaiming.
Outstanding, Lawson. We ask God to bless you in Thailand, bless our families, bless the country, bless the world indeed, and that we see some abatement of the COVID-19 pandemic, and certainly we see the success of the second civil rights revolution, that indeed we can all live in a society where the preamble to the American Declaration of Independence, which says that all men, in those days they said men, they meant women as well. Endowed with the fruits, all men are born equal, and endowed with certain unalienable rights, to include the rights to pursue liberty and happiness. We all hope that those things may come true. Thank you very much, Lawson.
Thank you.